Hello, travelers of time. Welcome back to another journey through history's most haunting moments. Before we dive into tonight's story, I'd love to know, where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment below and share your corner of the world. There's something profound about knowing that people across the globe are settling in together to explore the same dark chapter of history. If this is your first time here, welcome. Please consider subscribing, because we craft these stories specifically to help you unwind while learning about the fascinating, often troubling truths of our past. And if you're returning, thank you for being here. Your presence means everything. Tonight, we're traveling to colonial Massachusetts in 1692, a place where fear turned neighbor against neighbor, where children's accusations sent innocent people to the gallows, and where one of history's most infamous witch hunts consumed an entire community in just 9 months. You think you know the Salem Witch Trials? Perhaps you've heard of girls dancing in the woods, or maybe you know about the hangings. But the real story, what actually happened, why it happened, and who suffered, is far more complex, far more tragic, and far more revealing about human nature than most people realize. So settle in, dim the lights, get comfortable. We're about to uncover what really happened in Salem, and it's a story that will stay with you long after this night ends. Imagine being a mother in Salem Village, Massachusetts, in January 1692. Your 9-year-old daughter has been screaming for hours. She contorts her body into impossible positions. She claims invisible hands are pinching her. She sees specters, ghostly figures that no one else can see. The local doctor examines her and delivers a diagnosis that makes your blood run cold. The evil hand is upon her. Witchcraft. Your daughter isn't sick. According to the doctor, she's being tortured by a witch, and soon she'll name that witch. She'll point her finger at someone you know, maybe someone you trust, and that person will be arrested, tried, and quite possibly hanged. This is how the Salem Witch Trials began. Not with dancing in the woods, not with dramatic accusations, but with children's mysterious illnesses, terrified parents, and a community primed to believe that Satan himself had come to Massachusetts. To understand what really happened in Salem, you need to understand Salem Village in the winter of 1692. This wasn't some backward, ignorant settlement. These were educated English colonists who had crossed the Atlantic seeking religious freedom and built a thriving community. But they were also people living in constant fear. Salem Village, now called Danvers, Massachusetts, was a small farming community about 5 miles inland from Salem town, the prosperous port city. The village had approximately 600 residents, mostly Puritan families trying to make a living from farming in New England's harsh climate. The Puritans who settled Massachusetts Bay Colony were religious extremists who believed they were creating a city upon a hill, a perfect Christian society that would serve as a model for the world. They believed the Bible was literal truth. They believed in an active, interventionist God who rewarded the faithful and punished sinners. And they absolutely, completely believed in the devil. This wasn't abstract theology. Puritans believed Satan physically walked the earth, constantly seeking to corrupt and destroy God's people. Every misfortune, crop failure, illness, death, might be the devil's work. And the devil's favorite tools were witches. Humans who had made pacts with Satan in exchange for supernatural powers, which they used to harm their neighbors. By 1692, Salem Village was a community under tremendous stress. They'd spent decades in constant conflict with the neighboring Native American tribes. King Philip's War, which ended in 1678, had been absolutely devastating. Roughly 1 in 10 colonial men died, and numerous frontier settlements were destroyed. Survivors of these attacks, traumatized refugees, had fled to places like Salem Village, bringing their trauma with them. The village was also torn by internal conflicts. There was a bitter dispute between the farming families in the village and the merchant families in Salem town over taxes and political power. The village had recently hired a new minister, Reverend Samuel Parris, and not everyone was happy about it. The congregation was divided. Some families supported Parris, others wanted him gone. This created tension in a community that was supposed to be united in faith. Reverend Samuel Parris arrived in Salem Village in 1689 with his wife, his daughter Betty, age 9, his niece Abigail Williams, age 11, and 2 slaves he'd brought from Barbados, a man named John Indian and a woman named Tituba. The winter of 1691 to 1692 was particularly harsh. It was cold, dark, and there was little to do. Puritan children weren't allowed most forms of entertainment. No games, no toys, no celebrations. Their lives consisted of church, work, and Bible study. Anything that seemed frivolous was potentially sinful. In this environment of stress, boredom, and religious intensity, something began to happen in the Paris household that would soon engulf the entire region. In January 1692, Reverend Paris's daughter Betty and niece Abigail began exhibiting strange behaviors. They would fall into trances, staring blankly at nothing. They made odd sounds, barking like dogs, mewing like cats, screaming without apparent cause. Their bodies would contort into positions that seemed physically impossible. They complained of being pinched and pricked by invisible hands. Soon, other girls in the village began showing the same symptoms. And Putnam Jr., age 12, daughter of one of Salem Village's most prominent families. Elizabeth Hubbard, age 17, the niece of Dr. William Griggs, the town physician. Mercy Lewis, age 19, a servant in the Putnam household and a survivor of Native American attacks that had killed her parents. Dr. Griggs examined the girls and found no physical cause for their afflictions. In an age before modern medicine, when many illnesses had no explanation, doctors sometimes diagnosed what they couldn't understand as witchcraft. Dr. Griggs gave his verdict. These girls were bewitched. The Puritan adults were terrified. If witches were attacking children, the entire community was in danger. The magistrates, the local officials who served as judges, pressed the girls. Who was afflicting them? Who was the witch? At first, the girls were reluctant to name anyone, but the pressure from frightened adults was immense. Finally, in late February, they began to speak names. The first 3 women accused were social outcasts, which is critically important to understanding what happened next. Tituba was Reverend Paris's slave from Barbados, a woman of indigenous South American or African descent in a homogeneous white community. Sarah Good was a homeless beggar who went door to door asking for food, often muttering angrily when refused. Sarah Osborne was an elderly woman who had scandalized the village by living with a man before marrying him and who hadn't attended church in over a year. These were women with no power, no social standing, no one to defend them. They were easy targets. The 3 women were arrested on February 29, 1692, and brought before magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin for examination. These weren't trials. They were preliminary hearings to determine if there was enough evidence to hold the accused for trial. The examinations were public spectacles held in the Salem Village Meeting House, packed with frightened, angry colonists. The afflicted girls were brought in and immediately began their fits, screaming, convulsing, claiming they saw the accused women specters attacking them. Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne both denied being witches. They insisted they were innocent, but their denials meant nothing against the girls' dramatic performances. Tituba, however, confessed, and her confession changed everything. Tituba told the magistrates exactly what they wanted to hear. She said yes, she was a witch. She described meetings with the devil, who appeared to her sometimes as a man, sometimes as a dog or a hog. She said Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne were witches too, and there were others, a coven of witches in Massachusetts, working together to destroy the Puritan community. Why did Tituba confess? Historians believe Reverend Paris beat her until she told him what he wanted to hear. She may also have been shrewd enough to realize that in the witch trial logic of the time, those who confessed and named others were often spared, while those who maintained their innocence were hanged. Whether beaten or calculating, Tituba's confession unleashed the hysteria. If there was a coven of witches, then the 3 arrested women weren't the only ones. There were more, many more, and the afflicted girls would find them. After Tituba's confession, the accusations exploded. Throughout March and April 1692, the afflicted girls began naming more witches. But these weren't social outcasts anymore. They were accusing respectable church members, property owners, people of standing in the community. Martha Corey was accused. She was a full church member, a woman known for her piety. When she was brought in for examination and denied being a witch, the afflicted girls erupted in fits. They screamed that Martha Spector was attacking them right then. In the courtroom, the magistrates asked, how could this be happening if Martha wasn't a witch? Rebecca Nurse was accused. She was 71 years old, a beloved grandmother, deeply religious, someone everyone respected. When Rebecca was arrested, 39 members of the community signed a petition defending her character. But it didn't matter. The girls accused her, claimed her specter tormented them, and that was evidence enough. This is when the terror truly began. If Rebecca Nurse could be a witch, anyone could be. If Martha Corey could serve Satan, no one was safe. The accusations followed patterns that reveal the underlying social tensions in Salem Village. Many of the accused had been involved in disputes over land, inheritance, or church politics. The Putnam family, whose daughter Anne was one of the primary accusers, used accusations to target their rivals and enemies. But it wasn't just about settling scores. The psychological dynamic was more complex. Once the community accepted that witches were real and active, anything unusual could be interpreted as evidence of witchcraft. Did your cow die suddenly? Perhaps a witch cursed it. Did butter fail to churn? Witchcraft. Did you have a nightmare? A witch's specter visiting you in your sleep. People began remembering past incidents in new, sinister light. A woman who had muttered angrily years ago when refused charity? She must have been cursing you. That time you felt ill after arguing with a neighbor? Clearly they had bewitched you. The afflicted girls became the community's witch-finders. When they had fits, adults would ask, who is afflicting you? Who do you see? And the girls would name someone. That person would be arrested, examined, and usually sent to jail to await trial. The jail in Boston, where accused witches were held, was a nightmare. Prisoners were kept in chains, leg irons, wrist manacles. They were charged for their imprisonment. Food, shackles, even the straw they slept on. Many families were bankrupted paying for their accused relatives' imprisonment. Sarah Good was pregnant when arrested. She gave birth in jail. Her baby died there. By May 1692, the jails were overflowing with accused witches. Over 150 people had been accused and arrested. The colonial government needed to act. Governor William Phips established a special court of oyer and terminer, a court specifically to hear and determine the witch cases. He appointed as judges some of the colony's most respected men, including Lieutenant Governor William Stoughton, who became the chief judge and the driving force behind the trials. The court convened on June 2, 1692, for its first trial. The first person tried was Bridget Bishop, a woman who ran a tavern and had been accused of witchcraft years earlier. She was known for wearing flashy red clothing, suspicious behavior in Puritan culture. She was also rumored to be promiscuous. The evidence against Bridget Bishop was typical of the witch trials. Spectral evidence and testimony about suspicious incidents. The afflicted girls testified that Bridget's specter tormented them. Other witnesses testified that years ago, they'd had strange experiences they now interpreted as witchcraft. A feeling of being choked at night, an unexplained illness in a child. Spectral evidence was testimony that the accused person's specter, their ghostly shape, had appeared to the witness and harmed them. Even if the actual person had been miles away at the time, their specter could have traveled to commit evil. This created an impossible situation for the accused. How do you prove your specter didn't do something? How do you defend against testimony about invisible events only the accuser can see? Bridget Bishop was convicted on June 2nd. 8 days later, on June 10, 1692, she was taken to Gallows Hill, a rocky outcropping outside Salem town. Before a crowd of townspeople, she was hanged. She was the first. She would not be the last. On July 19th, 5 more were hanged. Sarah Good, Rebecca Nurse, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, and Sarah Wilds. Sarah Good went to her death cursing the magistrates. As she stood on the gallows, Reverend Nicholas Noyes urged her to confess. Sarah Good's last words were, "You are a liar. I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." Years later, Reverend Noyes died of a hemorrhage, choking on his own blood. Many believed it was Sarah Good's curse fulfilled. Rebecca Nurse had actually been acquitted. The jury found her not guilty. But when the verdict was announced, the afflicted girls erupted in fits so violent that Judge Stoughton sent the jury back to reconsider. Under pressure, they changed their verdict to guilty. Governor Phipps granted Rebecca a reprieve, but the accusers created such an uproar that he revoked it. Rebecca Nurse was hanged. On August 19th, 5 more were hanged: George Burroughs, John Proctor, George Jacobs Sr., John Willard, and Martha Carrier. George Burroughs was a former minister of Salem Village. His execution was particularly dramatic. As he stood on the gallows, he recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly, something witches supposedly couldn't do. The crowd began to murmur, questioning whether an innocent man was about to die. But Cotton Mather, the influential Boston minister who strongly supported the trials, was present. He addressed the crowd from horseback, assuring them that the devil could disguise himself as an angel of light. George Burroughs was hanged. On September 22nd, the final execution day, 8 more died: Martha Corey, Mary Easty, Alice Parker, and Pudiator, Margaret Scott, Wilmot Redd, Samuel Wardwell, and Mary Parker. These people died by hanging, a slow, agonizing death by strangulation. Their bodies were cut down and dumped in shallow graves. Their families weren't allowed to give them proper burials. But there was one more death, and it was the most horrifying of all. Giles Corey was an 80-year-old farmer, Martha Corey's husband. When accused of witchcraft, Giles refused to enter a plea. He wouldn't say guilty or not guilty. Under English law, if you didn't enter a plea, you couldn't be tried, but you also couldn't be convicted. Your property couldn't be confiscated, meaning your heirs would inherit. Giles was protecting his family's land. The court decided to use an old punishment called peine forte et dure, pressing. Giles was stripped naked, laid on the ground, and heavy stones were piled on his chest, gradually crushing him. The punishment was meant to force him to enter a plea. For 2 days they pressed him. Each time they asked if he would plead, he said only 2 words: more weight. On September 19, 1692, Giles Corey was crushed to death. He never entered a plea. He never confessed, and his family kept their land. By autumn of 1692, cracks were appearing in the witch trial logic. The afflicted girls had begun accusing increasingly prominent people. They accused Lady Mary Phipps, the governor's wife. They accused several Boston merchants. They accused Captain John Alden, a hero of King Philip's War, and the son of Mayflower passengers John and Priscilla Alden. When people of power and prestige were accused, suddenly the trials didn't seem so reliable. Ministers and intellectuals began questioning the use of spectral evidence. If the devil could assume anyone's shape, then spectral evidence proved nothing. An innocent person's specter could be used by Satan without their knowledge or consent. Increase Mather, Cotton Mather's father and one of Massachusetts's most influential ministers, wrote, "It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than 1 innocent person be condemned." The accused themselves were changing tactics. Earlier in the trials, those who confessed were spared execution, while those who maintained innocence were hanged. But by October, the jails were full of confessed witches who couldn't be hanged. You don't execute witnesses. Some of the accused began to realize that confession, not innocence, was the path to survival. Governor Phipps had been in Maine dealing with Native American attacks during much of the trials. When he returned and found his own wife accused, he began to reconsider. In October 1692, he dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer. He established a new superior court to finish trying the remaining accused, but with crucial differences. Spectral evidence was no longer allowed, and confessions made outside of court under duress couldn't be used as evidence. Under these new rules, the January 1693 trials resulted in only 3 convictions out of 56 cases. Governor Phipps pardoned all 3. In May 1693, he issued a general pardon for all remaining accused witches and ordered them released from prison. The Salem Witch Trials were over. The statistics are staggering. In 9 months, over 200 people were accused of witchcraft. 30 were convicted. 19 were hanged. One was pressed to death. At least 5 died in prison, including Sarah Good's infant daughter. Dozens of families were bankrupted. Children were orphaned. Reputations were destroyed. The social fabric of Salem Village was torn apart. The aftermath was complicated. Some participants expressed regret. In 1697, the Massachusetts General Court declared a day of fasting and repentance for the tragedy. Samuel Sewell, one of the trial judges, stood in church while his apology was read aloud, publicly accepting blame. The jury members from the trials signed a statement. "We fear we have been sadly deluded and mistaken. We do heartily ask forgiveness of you all, whom we have justly offended." And Putnam Jr., who had been one of the most active accusers, made a public apology in 1706 when she joined the church. She claimed she had been deluded by Satan and asked forgiveness from those she had accused. But some participants never apologized. Judge William Stoughton, who had been the driving force behind the trials and the most aggressive in pushing for convictions, never expressed any regret. He maintained until his death that the trials had been just. The accused who survived faced years of struggle. They had lost property, spent their savings on imprisonment, been publicly shamed. Some, like Tituba, remained in jail for years because they couldn't pay their prison fees. The families of the executed sought exoneration for their loved ones. It took until 1711 for the Massachusetts colony to pass legislation reversing the convictions and providing financial restitution to the families, though the amount was far too small to compensate for what they'd lost. Some of those executed weren't officially exonerated until centuries later. The last 5 weren't cleared until 2001, over 300 years after their deaths. So what really happened in Salem? Why did this occur? The simple answer: there were no witches. The devil wasn't in Massachusetts. The girls weren't bewitched. So what were they? Modern theories vary. Some historians believe the girls were engaging in attention-seeking behavior that spiraled out of control. Once they discovered that fits and accusations brought them power and attention in a society that normally silenced young people, they couldn't or wouldn't stop. Some psychologists suggest mass hysteria, a psychological phenomenon where groups of people develop similar symptoms without any physical cause. The first girls may have been genuinely ill, and others unconsciously imitated their symptoms. Some medical researchers have proposed ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye in warm, damp conditions. When consumed, it can cause hallucinations, convulsions, and the sensation of being pricked or bitten. The winter of 1691 to 1692 had been damp and warm enough for ergot growth, and rye was a staple crop in Salem Village. But these explanations only account for why the girls had fits. They don't explain why adults believed them, why the trials happened, why 19 people died. The deeper answer lies in fear. The Puritans lived in genuine terror of Satan. They believed he was real, active, and determined to destroy them. When their children showed signs of possible demonic influence, they panicked. The trials happened because the community already believed in witches. They needed only the slightest evidence to confirm what they already feared. Once the accusations started, social dynamics took over. Old grudges, property disputes, personal vendettas all found expression through witch accusations. And crucially, the legal system failed. The use of spectral evidence made defending oneself impossible. The judges were not impartial. They believed in witches and wanted convictions. There were no defense attorneys. The accused were guilty until proven innocent, and proving innocence was impossible. Salem reveals something disturbing about human nature. Under the right conditions of fear, stress, and belief, otherwise rational people can commit terrible injustices while believing they're doing good. Every person involved in the trials, the judges, the ministers, the accusers, believed they were protecting their community from real evil. This is perhaps the most terrifying revelation of all. The people who hanged 19 innocent men and women thought they were heroes. The Salem Witch Trials have become a metaphor for any situation where accusations are made without proper evidence, where fear overrides reason, where society turns against its own members. Arthur Miller's play The Crucible, written in 1953, used Salem as an allegory for McCarthyism, the 1950s hunt for communists in America that destroyed careers and lives based on accusations and fear rather than evidence. The parallels were deliberate. Both involved accusations that were hard to disprove, public testimony that ruined reputations, and a climate of fear that made dissent dangerous. But Salem's lessons extend beyond any single historical moment. They speak to human psychology and social dynamics that remain relevant today. We still see moral panics, moments when society becomes convinced of a widespread hidden threat and responds with disproportionate fear and punishment. The satanic panic of the 1980s, when daycare workers were falsely accused of satanic ritual abuse based on questionable testimony from children, echoed Salem directly. Many were convicted and imprisoned for crimes that never happened. We still see how social tensions find expression through accusations. When communities are under stress, economic hardship, political division, cultural change, they often look for scapegoats, for explanations that make complex problems simple. Salem Village was stressed by war, political conflict, and economic uncertainty. Those tensions found release through witch accusations. We still struggle with the same evidentiary problems. How do we balance protecting potential victims with protecting the accused? How do we evaluate accusations, especially when they involve invisible crimes or rely on testimony about subjective experiences? These questions plague modern discussions of everything from sexual assault allegations to online harassment. Salem teaches us about the danger of spectral evidence, of accepting as proof testimony about things only the accuser can perceive. In an age of social media, where accusations can spread instantly and reputations can be destroyed based on claims that may be true or false, Salem's warning about the importance of verifiable evidence feels urgently relevant. The trials also reveal how quickly us versus them thinking can develop. The accused witches were othered, turned into enemies of the community, their humanity stripped away. Once someone was labeled a witch, they were no longer a neighbor, a friend, a complex human being. They were evil incarnate, and any cruelty toward them was justified. We see this dehumanization constantly in modern political and social discourse. When we reduce people to labels, terrorist, racist, socialist, whatever the term, we risk losing sight of their humanity. Salem reminds us where that path leads. Perhaps most importantly, Salem teaches humility. The judges, ministers, and accusers of 1692 were certain they were right. They had evidence, the girls' fits, the confessions, the spectral sightings. They had authority, the court, the church, the government all agreed. They had conviction, absolute belief in their mission to protect the community from evil. They were wrong. Certainty is not the same as correctness. Consensus is not the same as truth. Authority can be mistaken. The righteous can do terrible wrong while believing they're doing good. This is Salem's ultimate lesson. Be very, very careful before you're certain someone is evil. Be very, very skeptical of accusations that can't be proven false. Be very, very protective of systems that presume innocence and require real evidence. Because if it could happen in Salem, in an educated, religious, well-intentioned community, it can happen anywhere, including here, including now. As we close this chapter tonight, remember the names: Sarah Good, Rebecca Nurse, Giles Corey, George Burroughs, Martha Corey, and the 15 others who died on Gallows Hill. Remember the 5 who died in prison. Remember the 200 who were accused and the families destroyed by fear and false accusations. They weren't witches. They were farmers, grandmothers, church members, ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances. They died because their community was afraid, because the legal system failed, because once accusations began, it was easier to find more witches than to admit there had never been any witches at all. Their story isn't just history. It's a warning passed down through more than 3 centuries. This could happen again, in different forms with different accusations, but the same fundamental dynamics: fear, certainty, the abandonment of evidence, the dehumanization of the accused. Remembering Salem means staying vigilant against those dynamics in ourselves and in our societies. It means insisting on evidence. It means protecting the accused as well as the accuser. It means maintaining our humanity even when we're afraid. Thank you for joining me on this difficult journey tonight, travelers of time. I hope this exploration of Salem has given you not just historical knowledge, but wisdom about human nature and society that remains relevant today. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing for more history that matters. And let me know in the comments, what lessons from Salem do you think are most important for us to remember today? Until next time, sleep well. And remember, the real monsters in Salem weren't witches or devils. They were fear, certainty, and the abandonment of justice. May we never forget.